Hi, it's Paul. So completion can be a bit of an anti-climax following the excitement and all the work that you undertake to get a deal done. So, you know, due diligence is complete, the SPA is agreed, funding's approved, and all of the conditions precedent are satisfied. So, I suppose congratulations for getting to that point, but because most deals tend to fail at the end, not the beginning, usually because of fatigue or loss of momentum, maybe complacency or some sort of small unresolved issues that become big ones. And I guess this is the last part really in terms of the key risk. So even if a deal feels like it's almost there and it feels like it's almost done, the risk is still very much live. Nothing is ultimately complete until funds are drawn, shares are transferred, and documents are executed. And I think the key mindset at this point is to assume that it can still break until the money's moved. So, how do you get the deal over the line at the final phase? Well, your job really shifts from strategy to execution. You're ultimately the central point of communication. You're ensuring all the advisors are aligned. You're trying to maintain that calmness between everybody, and you're pushing for decisions, not debates. I think there's some practical tools at this point. So like having a completion checklist, for example, a documents checklist, a conditions tracker, and you can sort of have weekly or twice weekly calls with follow up with clear action emails in those final weeks. I suppose uh, there's common issues that can sort of delay things are missing documents, or director resignations aren't ready, or bank conditions aren't fully ticked, or last minute due diligence questions, or even sellers getting cold feet, or lawyers sort of reopening points that have already been settled. So 99% of these issues are logistical and fairly straightforward to solve. They're not commercial. But yeah, final conditions for funding typically can be that the bank wants to see an executed copy of the SPA and all the other documents are in order, including board minutes, security documents, and if there's any sort of insurance confirmations. Ultimately banks move when everything's perfect, not when it's nearly perfect. So a good thing to do would be to organise between the bank's lawyers and yours to draw funds down a day or two before completion is scheduled to take place, so they can be held in, the lawyer's client account on an undertaking to say that funds can be released once all conditions are met. Is a good way to, make sure the funds are ready. We just need to make sure those final conditions are met. If you're including cash in the sale, don't be caught out by bank payment limits. Moving large sums of money through the banking system can can have its issues. So make sure that sellers are fully aware of what the process is with the bank to move, large sums of money. I've sometimes had to get the seller to go down to the bank to organise, same day payments and take their ID into the local branch. Once you get a day to deal day, the reason it can feel like an anticlimax, I suppose, is because usually everything's signed electronically. It's probably already been signed maybe the day or two before, with final documents held to order by the lawyers. So actually, completion can be as quick as a simple call from the lawyer to say it's all done. So the typical flow that we see is, documents tend to be executed the day or two before and held to order, subject to final conditions. Funds typically get transferred the day or two before, and then obviously they're released once all conditions are met on completion, and then shares are transferred, and congratulations, and then it's silent. So deal day for me. Very rarely is champagne, but more a relief of all the hard work that's gone into ultimately getting that deal over the line. So yeah, you've had sort of months of intensity to almost like a sudden stop. So you have like an adrenaline crash. There's no real fireworks, and completion is basically the end of the transaction, not the deal. So yes, smart buyers immediately at completion, tend to thank the seller, reassure the staff. So, make sure that there's a communications plan in place prior to the transaction completing, which you agree with the seller. And really it's about communication of stability, and then really taking control of the company. So lock down cash controls and, make sure mandates and authorities are sort of all in place, and then, work through your 30, 60, 90-day integration plan. I think the first 30 days tend to set the tone for the next 3 years. So, it's not uncommon for a seller and you to sort of have anxiety post completion. So I think empathy is still very, very, very much important. Ultimately you've bought a great business, but you've not beaten an opponent. So, yeah, I suppose to summarize, deals do die late if they're not managed. Execution really does beat brilliance at the end. So, calm, clarity, and communication tend to win. And completion is really a handover, not the finish line. So yeah, if you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you want to be notified when the next video is out, do click subscribe. If you're interested to learn more about mergers and acquisitions, you can join our free dealmaker community. The link's in the description, and you can connect directly with me and hundreds of dealmakers around the world. So yeah, for now, happy deal making, and do drop comments. What you've offered on in the past month. You don't need to give company names, but yeah, it'd be good to understand industries that deals are flying about in deal sizes. I'd love to hear what you're buying.